Now we're going to talk about this analyze phase. What we have done in the measure phase is we've constructed a graphical model of the process. We talked there a little bit about value stream analysis. And now what we want to do is understand, how does this process really flow? And so remember, in statistical thinking, we recognize that all work is done in processes. Processes of variation, and that when we take a look at that variation, if we measure and control the variation, we can improve the process. So what we want to do is take that first step and understand the process. So the way we do this is we'll begin with that value stream map, and we'll analyze what's called the one-piece flow. Now, when we do this, we have to make sure that we staple ourselves to an order. Now, one of the things you'll find in your readings is an article in Harvard Business Review exactly by that title, Staple Yourself to the Order. And what it's saying is, go to the Gemba and see what's really happening. Now, many of you have probably heard this word Gemba before. There's 4 characters in this word. It's a king, it's at sunset, taking a review or discovering what happened, and then seeing a pigsty. Now, what I want to do is use the 5W1H questions to understand what's actually going on. So the first question is, what happened? Well, it's a survey. It's a detailed scrutiny of what went on in the workplace. Who was there? The king. It's an executive function. It's not necessarily the function of the worker, but it's a function of management to understand what's happening. When did it happen? At sunset. This is at the end of a natural working period. Where did it happen? At the place of doing the real work. Why did it happen? To discover the real thing that was happening in the work. How did it happen? It was personal activity by the executive to go and understand and notice what actually is going on. So we talk about the Gemba. We can do this by tracing any of the flows that we see in a work process. Remember, we talked about the spaghetti diagram. We were talking about exploratory data analysis. And we saw that there were 7 different types of flows. And we can create a spaghetti diagram for any one of those types of flows. And so when we go to the Gemba, what we want to do is trace a flow. Go and staple yourself to the order. So maybe, like the article in the Harvard Business Review, we understand how did the order go from the time it was received from the customer to the time it's satisfied and shipped back to the customer as a completed order. So that would be a physical flow. We could also have a flow of assets or logic like data flows, or human flows, how people walk, financial flows, how money is moved, conceptual flows, how ideas develop, like in new product development, or authoritative flows, and that is about the process by which we delegate decision rights in an organization and hold people accountable. In addition to this, when we have the one-piece flow, what we want to do is understand what's happening in the timing. So we establish this concept called Takt time, which we also discussed in exploratory data analysis. So Takt time is the rate of the incoming orders versus the time available to work. We can analyze the flow of work by tracking one unit through each step in the process and understanding. And by doing that, we can calculate the flow statistics for cycle time, how much waste was occurring in the process in terms of delay, how much cost was being added to the process at each step in the process, what is the inherent quality or right the first time through each step in the process. And as we accumulate a number of these one-piece flows, we start building a distribution. That distribution of data from that original information we captured is going to be called a sample. And when that's done within one rational subgroup, all using the same equipment, the same operator, in the same period of time, parts from the same supplier, then we get an idea of what the best that process can be. And from that, we can then start working on ideas to streamline the process to make it work. And so step by step, we'll go through. We'll see how much are we adding data? How much of the data is saying we're actually adding value, and what percent of time is caused by motion? What percent of time are we really adding value that the customer would be willing to pay for? How much value are we contributing to the process? How much work is monotonous? There's hazards in the system. And so operators may actually be creating wasteful circumstances or safety hazards. Do we have inventory? What's the reason for it? What's the distance that things are traveling in the process? Can we shorten it? So all of these things, we call some of this work called a hidden factory. It's cost that's being accumulated in the process, but it's not part of the ideal way of working. And so that means that those are parts of waste that could actually be eliminated. So the primary focus in a lean enterprise is eliminating waste and loss. When Taiichi Ohno started looking at how do you improve the quality of production after World War II at Toyota, his company identified actually 8 different types of waste. So one was overproduction, producing more than we need to, waiting or idle time, transportation waste, going too far or longer than we need to, overprocessing, putting too much processed content into something when we don't need it, or too much of a chemical or an additive into process. Inventory of all types can be also excessive. And we also have unnecessary motion, people moving and doing things they don't need to. Of course, we also have defective parts and products, quality waste, where we have to do the work all over again. And finally, what Ohno called the most important work type of waste, and that was underutilized people. People who were not using to the fullest of their capability and therefore were wasting human energy. All of these types of waste are what we call Muda wastes. They're waste in the work discipline. But there are other types of waste that we might also care about. And so those were historical wastes from the late 1940s, early 1950s. Other concerns we might have about waste today are wasted energy, pollution, wasted space, delays in the provision of service, incorrect inventory, data that doesn't have integrity, duplication of effort, unnecessary meetings. And so one of the things we have to do is find out what really are the types of Muda we have in our organization. Not just get stuck with the 8 categories from Toyota of over 50 years ago, but think a little bit more fluidly. What are the wastes we have? And be very careful that we specify them and describe them in ways that the people in our organization can understand them. Another type of way of looking at the process is to look at loss. A process can be 100% effective, operating truly at the ideal level, but that's this ideal process capability. That is this process capability we could say just due to common cause, the best the process can operate. But what we find out is most processes don't operate there. They're operating at a loss at what we call CPK. That actual process capability has a gap between there and the design process capability. There are different types of losses, what the Japanese call the 6 losses, that hold us back from creating the ideal case. So equipment breakdowns, slowdown or stoppage of production, defects and rework in the production process, the setup time of the process where we have to change over and do something, the startup time where we have to get the process aligned or begin, and then maybe there are cycle time losses where the process is really not operating at its optimal throughput capability. So the idea is understand the time components and how each of these different losses contributes to the loss in the process. How do we do that? Well, one way is go on a Gemba walk. Go and understand by looking at the process itself. So don't just look at the summary metrics that might be posted on the walls of the shop floor. Those are there to inspire and motivate employees. Look at the actual work, the actual thing the employees are doing. What type of problems, concerns, or issues can you see? Where were they located in the process? How big is that problem? How much is the waste or loss that you can see? What type of waste was it? Was it Mori waste, irrational waste, Mura waste, flow waste, or Muda waste, discipline in the process? And if you discovered Muda waste, which of those 8 different types of Muda waste did you observe? Now, when you do this audit, be sure that at the end you've recorded your information and your observations, and you're able to share that result of the Gemba audit with your process workers. Because most often, they'll be the ones who are involved in correcting the issues and concerns that you've discovered in the process. So, this is the beginning of the process. Before we start capturing this data that we can see about the amount of cost, the amount of time lost, and the quality issues in terms of processes done right the first time, and use those measures to analyze the actual performance of the process. So now we're going to convert from lean into statistical thinking to understand how big is a problem and to sort through and focus us on where we should actually be trying to understand the performance detail difference between Bob and Wow.